Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Soldier's Return. Warner Grimes had built his life on three pillars: duty, loyalty, and precision. 20 years in special operations had carved these principles into his very bones. At 42, his weathered face bore the map of countless missions across hostile territories, but his steel-gray eyes remained as sharp as the day he first donned the uniform. Warner met Shannon Branch during a brief leave in San Diego. She was a nursing student then, all golden hair and bright smiles, working nights at a diner to pay her way through school. Their courtship was a whirlwind of stolen weekends between deployments. Shannon said she loved his dedication, his unwavering moral compass. She promised to wait through the long separations that came with his chosen profession. They married in a small ceremony at Camp Pendleton. Shannon wore her grandmother's dress, and Warner stood tall in his dress blues. Their son Thad was born 2 years later, a perfect blend of Warner's determination and Shannon's quick wit. For 8 years, they built what Warner believed was an unshakable foundation. The cracks began during Warner's extended deployment in Afghanistan. Shannon's letters grew shorter, less frequent. Phone calls became strained, filled with uncomfortable silences. When Warner returned home after 18 months overseas, he found a house that felt hollow despite being filled with the same furniture, the same pictures on the walls. Shannon had grown distant, claiming the stress of single parenthood had changed her. She spoke of feeling trapped, of dreams deferred. Warner, trained to read between the lines in enemy intelligence, began to notice the small inconsistencies in her stories. The late-night nursing shifts that didn't align with the hospital schedule he discreetly verified. The new jewelry she claimed was a gift from her sister. The way she flinched when he touched her unexpectedly. But Warner was a man who believed in fixing what was broken rather than abandoning it. He requested stateside assignments, took early leave whenever possible, and tried to rebuild the connection that once bound them together. He organized family camping trips, helped Thad with school projects, and attempted to court his own wife all over again. It wasn't enough. Shannon had already begun her exodus from their marriage, though she maintained the facade with practiced efficiency. She filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning while Warner was conducting training exercises at Quantico. The papers cited irreconcilable differences, but Warner knew there was more to the story. The truth emerged during the custody proceedings. Eugene Swanson, a successful contractor who specialized in government building projects, had been Shannon's paramour for over 2 years. The timeline struck Warner like a physical blow. Their affair had begun while he was risking his life in hostile territory, trusting that his family was safe and faithful back home. Eugene was everything Warner wasn't: smooth-talking, financially comfortable, and permanently stationed in civilian life. He drove expensive cars, owned a sprawling house in the suburbs, and promised Shannon the stability and presence that Warner's military career couldn't provide. The divorce was swift and clinical. Shannon received the house, primary custody of Thad, and a substantial portion of Warner's military savings. Warner was granted weekend visitation and 2 weeks during school breaks. He watched his son's confusion and pain during the proceedings, saw how the boy tried to be strong for both parents while his world crumbled around him. Warner moved into a sparse apartment near the base, its sterile walls a stark contrast to the warm home he'd lost. He threw himself into his work with renewed intensity, accepting the most dangerous assignments, pushing his body and mind to their limits. His commanding officers noted his exceptional performance, but his closest friends worried about the cold efficiency that had replaced his former balance. During their brief encounters, Thad would tell Warner about Eugene's attempts to win him over with expensive gifts and elaborate outings. The boy was polite but distant, clearly struggling to navigate the complex emotions of his parents' separation. Warner reassured his son that none of this was his fault, that love didn't end just because adults made poor choices. What Warner didn't tell Thad was that he had begun to compile a detailed dossier on Eugene Swanson. Old habits from intelligence gathering died hard, and Warner's access to information networks made the task almost effortless. He learned about Eugene's business practices, his financial holdings, his personal relationships, and his past. Every detail was cataloged and cross-referenced, not out of immediate malice, but from a soldier's instinct to know his enemy. The final blow came when Shannon and Eugene married in a lavish ceremony just 8 months after the divorce was finalized. Warner wasn't invited, of course, but Thad provided a detailed account of the event during their next weekend together. The boy seemed genuinely happy that his mother was happy, displaying a maturity that both impressed and saddened Warner. As Warner listened to his son describe the wedding, he made a silent promise. He would rebuild his relationship with Thad, maintain his dignity throughout this transition, and find a way to move forward. He believed, with the naive optimism of a man trained to solve problems through direct action, that time would heal these wounds, and that life would eventually return to some form of normalcy. He had no way of knowing that his real war was just beginning. Chapter 2. The New Family. Eugene Swanson had perfected the art of calculated charm over his 45 years. Born into a middle-class family in Ohio, he learned early that success came not from hard work alone, but from understanding what people wanted to hear and providing it with unwavering confidence. His construction and contracting business had flourished by securing government contracts, a field where relationships mattered more than competitive bidding. When Eugene first encountered Shannon at a charity function for veterans' families, he saw more than just an attractive woman trapped in a difficult marriage. He saw an opportunity to acquire something that belonged to a man he instinctively viewed as a rival. Shannon represented the ultimate prize, the wife of a decorated soldier, a woman whose loyalty had to be earned rather than bought. Eugene's courtship of Shannon was a masterpiece of manipulation. He presented himself as the antithesis of her absent husband, emotionally available, financially stable, and completely devoted to her happiness. He listened to her complaints about Warner's long deployments, her fears about military life, and her dreams of a more conventional existence. Then he systematically provided solutions to every problem she presented. The affair began innocuously enough. Coffee meetings to discuss mutual friends evolved into lunch dates where Eugene offered Shannon a sympathetic ear. He was patient, never pushing too hard, always positioning himself as a friend who simply wanted to help. When Shannon finally crossed the line, she believed it was her own decision, unaware of how carefully Eugene had orchestrated every step of her emotional journey. Eugene's approach to Thad was equally calculated. He understood that winning the boy's acceptance was crucial to solidifying his relationship with Shannon. He researched Thad's interests, bought expensive gifts, and positioned himself as the fun alternative to the boy's stern, often absent father. Eugene took Thad to baseball games, taught him to drive golf carts at the country club, and regaled him with stories of construction sites and business adventures. But Eugene's patience had limits, especially when it came to Thad's obvious loyalty to Warner. The boy was polite but reserved, accepting Eugene's generosity while maintaining an emotional distance that frustrated his stepfather. Eugene began to view Thad's resistance as a personal challenge, a problem that required a more direct solution. The newlywed period was a carefully orchestrated performance for Shannon's benefit. Eugene hired a decorator to transform his house into a warm family home, complete with family photos and Thad's artwork displayed prominently on the refrigerator. He attended school functions, coached Little League, and played the role of devoted stepfather with convincing enthusiasm. Shannon basked in the attention and stability that Eugene provided. After years of managing household crises alone while Warner was deployed, she relished having a partner who was consistently present. Eugene's business success allowed her to reduce her nursing hours and focus on creating the domestic bliss she'd always envisioned. The facade began to crack during the third month of their marriage. Eugene's true personality emerged gradually, like a photograph developing in a darkroom. His charm had always been a tool rather than a genuine trait, and maintaining it required energy he wasn't willing to expend indefinitely. The first incident occurred during a family dinner when Thad mentioned an upcoming father-son camping trip that Warner had planned. Eugene's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but his voice remained level as he suggested that perhaps they should plan their own family activities instead. When Thad politely explained that he'd already committed to the trip with his father, Eugene's smile grew strained. "You know, Thad," Eugene said, cutting his steak with more force than necessary, "I've been thinking it might be time you started calling me Dad. We're a family now, and it would mean a lot to your mother." Thad glanced at Shannon, who was suddenly very interested in her mashed potatoes. "I already have a dad," Thad replied quietly but firmly. Eugene's fork clattered against his plate. "Your father isn't here, son." I'm the one who's taking care of you and your mother now. I think I've earned a little respect." The tension in the room was palpable. Shannon intervened quickly, changing the subject and defusing the immediate conflict, but the damage was done. Eugene had revealed the possessive nature that lurked beneath his polished exterior, and Thad had drawn a line that he wasn't willing to cross. Over the following weeks, Eugene's demands became more frequent and less subtle. He questioned Thad's phone calls with Warner, criticized the boys' enthusiasm for activities they'd shared, and began implementing household rules that seemed designed to erase Warner's influence from their daily life. Shannon found herself caught between her desire to maintain peace in her new marriage and her protective instincts toward her son. She rationalized Eugene's behavior as natural growing pains, convinced herself that his jealousy stemmed from genuine love for their family. When Thad confided his discomfort to her, Shannon encouraged him to be more understanding, to give Eugene a chance to prove himself as a father figure. Eugene's business dealings began to reflect his personal frustrations. He started pursuing military contracts more aggressively, not for their profitability, but for the opportunity to interact with Warner's professional community. He attended veterans events, joined organizations that put him in contact with active duty personnel, and cultivated relationships that might eventually lead to useful intelligence about his stepson's biological father. The psychological pressure on Thad intensified daily. Eugene criticized his table manners, his grades, his choice of friends, and his attitude. Every conversation became a subtle battle for dominance, with Eugene using his authority as head of household to chip away at the boy's confidence and independence. Thad began to withdraw, spending more time in his room and looking forward to his weekends with Warner with desperate anticipation. He tried to shield his father from the growing tension at home, not wanting to create additional conflict between his parents. The 10-year-old carried burdens that would have challenged adults, maintaining a careful balance between loyalty to his father and desire to protect his mother's happiness. The situation reached a breaking point on a rainy Thursday evening when Thad accidentally spilled grape juice on Eugene's expensive Persian rug. What should have been a minor household accident became a defining moment that would change the trajectory of all their lives. Eugene's carefully maintained mask finally slipped completely, revealing the cruel, controlling man who had been hiding behind practiced charm and calculated generosity. Chapter 3. The Breaking Point. The call came at 0347 hours, Kabul time. Warner was deep in hostile territory, leading a reconnaissance mission to locate a high-value target when his satellite phone vibrated against his chest. Protocol demanded radio silence during active operations, but the persistence of the caller triggered a cold dread in his gut that had nothing to do with the enemy forces surrounding their position. Warner signaled his team to hold position and move to a concealed location before answering. The voice on the other end belonged to Dr. Grace Larson from San Diego Children's Hospital, and her words hit him like shrapnel from an IED. "Mr. Grimes, we're treating your son for a broken arm and second-degree burns on his back and shoulders. He's stable, but he's asking for you." The world narrowed to a pinpoint of fury so pure it threatened to consume everything in its path. Warner's training kicked in automatically, his voice remaining steady despite the volcanic rage building in his chest. "What happened?" "There was an incident at home. The stepfather brought him in about an hour ago, said the boy fell down the stairs and accidentally backed into a space heater." "But Mr. Grimes," Dr. Larson's voice dropped to a whisper, "I've been treating abused children for 15 years. These injuries aren't consistent with the story we've been given." In the background, Warner could hear his son's voice, weak but determined. "Tell my dad. Tell him Mom's new husband did this to me. Tell him it happened after I refused to call him father." The satellite phone trembled in Warner's grip. Every instinct screamed at him to abandon the mission, to commandeer the nearest aircraft and cross half the world to reach his boy. But Warner was a soldier first, and soldiers completed their missions even when their personal world was crumbling. Lieutenant Colonel Charlie Sellers, Warner's commanding officer and longtime friend, materialized beside him like a ghost in the pre-dawn darkness. The older man had monitored the radio traffic and understood the situation without requiring explanation. "Warner," Sellers said quietly, "your mission is scrubbed. The Stealth Hawk is yours." Within 6 hours, Warner was airborne, racing across continents while his mind calculated not flight paths, but revenge. The special operations community took care of its own, and an attack on a soldier's child was an attack on the entire Brotherhood. Sellers had expedited Warner's emergency leave and provided access to resources that weren't available through normal military channels. During the 14-hour flight, Warner made a series of carefully encrypted phone calls. He contacted Dr. Larson to get a full medical report on Thad's condition. He spoke with the police detective assigned to the case, learning that Eugene had spun an elaborate story about the boy's accident and that Shannon was backing her husband's version of events. Most importantly, he activated a network of former special operations personnel who now worked in various civilian capacities throughout San Diego. By the time Warner's plane touched down at Lindbergh Field, he had a complete picture of what had transpired in his absence. Eugene's psychological abuse had escalated to physical violence when Thad finally stood up to his stepfather's demands. The 10-year-old had endured weeks of intimidation, manipulation, and degradation before reaching his breaking point. The triggering incident was both simple and devastating. Eugene had insisted that Thad begin calling him Dad in front of Shannon's visiting sister and her family. When Thad quietly but firmly refused, Eugene erupted in a rage that had been building for months. He grabbed the boy by the arm, twisting it until the bone snapped, then pressed him against the electric baseboard heater until his shirt caught fire. Shannon had been upstairs during the assault, claimed she didn't hear the commotion. When she found Thad writhing on the living room floor, Eugene had already concocted his story about a fall down the stairs. Shannon, faced with the choice between protecting her son and preserving her marriage, had chosen to support her husband's lie. Warner arrived at the hospital to find Thad sedated but awake, his small body dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding his bed. The boy's face lit up when he saw his father, and Warner had to fight to keep his expression calm and reassuring. "I'm sorry, Dad," Thad whispered through his pain medication haze. "I tried to be strong like you taught me, but he kept pushing and pushing." Warner knelt beside the bed, taking his son's uninjured hand in both of his. "You have nothing to apologize for, soldier. You stood up for yourself, and you told the truth when it mattered. I'm proud of you. Are you going to make him pay?" Thad's question was asked with the innocent directness that only children possess. Warner looked into his son's eyes that held too much pain and knowledge for a 10-year-old, and made a promise that would define the rest of his life. "Yes, son. I'm going to make them all pay." Dr. Larson provided Warner with detailed documentation of Thad's injuries, including photographs that would haunt his dreams for years to come. The burn patterns were clearly intentional. The arm fracture showed signs of twisting force rather than impact trauma. The medical evidence painted a picture of deliberate, calculated abuse. Detective Mario Walker, a 20-year veteran of the San Diego Police Department, met with Warner privately to discuss the case. Walker was sympathetic but realistic about the challenges they faced. "Without your son's testimony and some hard evidence, it's going to be difficult to make charges stick," Walker explained. "The stepfather has money for good lawyers, and your ex-wife is backing his story. We'll investigate thoroughly, but I wanted you to understand the landscape." Warner nodded, his expression giving nothing away. "Detective, I understand the limitations of the legal system. Sometimes justice has to be pursued through other channels." Walker studied Warner's face carefully. "Mr. Grimes, I hope you're not suggesting anything that might compromise this investigation or put you in legal jeopardy." "Of course not, Detective. I'm just a father who wants to protect his son." But as Warner spoke those words, his mind was already working through the preliminary stages of a plan that would be far more comprehensive and devastating than anything the justice system could provide. Eugene Swanson and Shannon had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, had committed an act that demanded a response proportional to the crime. Warner had spent 20 years learning how to wage war against enemies of his country. Now he would apply those same skills to enemies of his family. The reckoning was coming, and it would be absolute. Chapter 4: Intelligence Gathering. Warner Grimes understood that effective warfare required superior intelligence. Over the next 3 weeks, while Thad recovered from his injuries in Warner's temporary custody, his father conducted the most thorough reconnaissance mission of his career. Warner rented a modest apartment near the hospital where Thad was receiving follow-up treatment, ostensibly to be close to his son during the recovery period. In reality, The location provided perfect surveillance opportunities for monitoring Eugene's business operations and Shannon's daily routines. Through his network of former special operations colleagues who had transitioned to civilian careers, Warner began assembling a comprehensive dossier on both targets. Morris Bolton, a former Navy SEAL who now worked as a private investigator, provided detailed financial records showing Eugene's business practices bordered on fraudulent but remained technically legal. Hayden May, an Army intelligence specialist turned cybersecurity consultant, accessed digital communications that revealed the true timeline of Shannon and Eugene's affair. The most damaging intelligence came from an unexpected source. Carmela Escobar, a housekeeper who had worked for Eugene for 3 years, approached Warner through a mutual contact. Carmela had witnessed the abuse incident firsthand and was willing to testify, but only if she could be guaranteed protection from retaliation. "Senor Eugene, he is not a good man," Carmela told Warner during a clandestine meeting at a coffee shop downtown. "He screams at the boy when Senora Shannon is not home. He calls him names, says his real father is a killer who doesn't love him. The night of the accident, I was in the laundry room. I heard everything." Carmela's testimony provided the missing piece of Warner's legal strategy, but more importantly, it revealed the psychological torture Thad had endured beyond the physical assault. Eugene had systematically worked to destroy the boy's connection to his father, using Shannon's guilt and desire for stability to enable his increasingly abusive behavior. Warner also discovered that Eugene's contracting business was built on a foundation of shortcuts and bribery that had thus far escaped regulatory scrutiny. The company regularly used substandard materials in government projects, inflated costs through fictional subcontractors, and maintained relationships with local officials through carefully disguised kickbacks. Shannon's situation was more complex. Warner's investigation revealed a woman who had gradually surrendered her moral compass in exchange for financial security and social status. Her nursing supervisors noted a decline in her performance and dedication following her remarriage. Former friends described her as increasingly isolated, defensive about her new husband's behavior, and unwilling to acknowledge obvious warning signs about Eugene's treatment of Thad. The custody hearing provided Warner with his first direct confrontation with both targets since Thad's hospitalization. Eugene arrived with an expensive legal team and an air of wounded righteousness, portraying himself as a devoted stepfather who had done everything possible to help Thad through the trauma of his parents' divorce. Shannon took the witness stand wearing designer clothes and enough makeup to conceal the stress lines that had appeared around her eyes. Her testimony was a masterpiece of selective memory and willful blindness. She claimed Thad was prone to accidents, that his relationship with Eugene was improving, and that Warner's military background made him unsuitable for full custody of a traumatized child. "Warner is trained to kill people," Shannon testified, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "How can that possibly be the right environment for our son's recovery?" Warner's attorney, Leonard Stanley, systematically dismantled their fabricated narrative using the evidence Warner had compiled. Medical records, witness testimony, and digital communications painted a clear picture of deliberate abuse and conspiracy to cover up the crime. The judge, Honorable Alice Best, was a 20-year veteran of family court who had seen every variation of domestic manipulation. She studied the evidence with the thoroughness it deserved, asked pointed questions that made Eugene visibly uncomfortable, and ultimately awarded Warner temporary, full custody of Thad pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. Eugene's mask slipped completely as the judge read her decision. His face contorted with rage, and he whispered something to Shannon that made her recoil as if struck. Warner cataloged the moment, adding it to his growing understanding of Eugene's true character. Outside the courthouse, Eugene approached Warner with the confidence of a man who believed his wealth and connections made him untouchable. "You think you've won something here, soldier boy?" Eugene's voice carried a threatening undertone. "This is just the beginning. I have resources you can't imagine, and I don't give up on what's mine." Warner studied Eugene with the detached interest of a scientist examining a particularly venomous specimen. "Mr. Swanson, I want you to understand something very clearly. Thad is not your property, and neither is Shannon. You made the mistake of hurting my son, and now you're going to learn what that really costs." Eugene laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "What are you going to do? Kill me?" You're nothing but a government-attacked dog who's outlived his usefulness. I built a business empire while you were playing war in foreign countries. I have connections throughout this city, and I know how to destroy men like you." Warner's smile was colder than Arctic wind. "Eugene, you're absolutely right. I am a government-attacked dog, and I've spent the last 20 years learning how to hunt men who think they're untouchable." That evening, Warner sat with Thad in their temporary apartment, helping the boy with his physical therapy exercises. Thad was healing well physically, but the emotional scars would take much longer to fade. "Dad, what's going to happen to Eugene and Mom?" Thad asked during a quiet moment. Warner considered his response carefully. "They're going to face the consequences of their choices, son. Your mother chose to protect a man who hurt you instead of protecting you from him. That's not something a good parent does. Do you still love Mom?" The question pierced Warner's carefully maintained emotional armor. "I love the woman I married, Thad. But that woman disappeared a long time ago. The person living in that house now is someone I don't recognize. Are you going to hurt them?" Warner pulled his son closer, mindful of the boy's healing injuries. "I'm going to make sure they can never hurt you again. Sometimes that requires actions that seem harsh, but a father's first responsibility is protecting his children." That night, after Thad had fallen asleep, Warner activated the final phase of his intelligence operation. Using skills honed in the world's most dangerous places, he conducted a covert entry into Eugene's house while the couple attended a charity dinner. What he discovered in Eugene's home office exceeded his darkest expectations. Hidden behind a false wall, Eugene maintained detailed records of his illegal business practices, photographs documenting his systematic abuse of Thad, and most damning of all, a collection of similar photos suggesting Thad wasn't his first victim. Warner photographed everything, copied digital files, and planted surveillance devices that would monitor all future activities in the house. He was back in his apartment within 2 hours, undetected and armed with evidence that would destroy both Eugene and Shannon completely. But Warner's plan extended far beyond simple legal justice. Eugene had promised a war, and Warner intended to give him exactly that. Chapter 5. The Opening Moves. Warner's campaign began with surgical precision, targeting the pillars that supported Eugene's carefully constructed life. Like a demolitions expert, he understood that bringing down a structure required identifying and severing the right load-bearing elements at the optimal sequence. The first strike hit Eugene's business empire. Warner leaked selected evidence of fraudulent practices to Gerard Oliver, an investigative journalist with the San Diego Tribune who specialized in exposing government contract corruption. Oliver's subsequent series of articles triggered immediate federal investigations into Eugene's company and several key government officials who had approved his contracts. Within a week, Eugene found himself facing inquiries from the FBI, IRS, and Department of Defense Office of Inspector General. His carefully cultivated relationships with local politicians became liabilities as they scrambled to distance themselves from the growing scandal. Contracts worth millions of dollars were frozen pending investigation, and Eugene's business partners began looking for exit strategies. Shannon felt the pressure immediately. The country club membership was quietly revoked. Invitations to social events stopped arriving. The women who had welcomed her into Eugene's social circle suddenly became unavailable for lunch dates and shopping expeditions. The isolation was gradual but inexorable, designed to make Shannon understand that her marriage had become a liability rather than an asset. Warner's second move targeted Eugene's personal relationships with surgical accuracy. Using information gathered during his surveillance, Warner began contacting Eugene's former business associates, ex-girlfriends, and family members. Each conversation was carefully crafted to plant seeds of doubt about Eugene's character while appearing to seek information for Thad's protection. The strategy proved devastatingly effective. Eugene's younger brother Oliver Swanson, previously his closest ally and business partner, began asking uncomfortable questions about the circumstances surrounding Thad's injuries. Eugene's ex-wife, Dion Humphrey, came forward with stories of emotional abuse during their marriage that provided disturbing parallels to Thad's experience. Most damaging was Warner's contact with Keisha Gonzalez, Eugene's former secretary who had been quietly forced out of the company after rejecting his advances. Keisha provided detailed accounts of Eugene's inappropriate behavior toward female employees, his explosive temper when challenged, and his habit of using company resources for personal vendettas. Eugene tried to counterattack by hiring private investigators to dig up dirt on Warner's military service, hoping to find evidence of misconduct or psychological instability. The effort backfired spectacularly when the investigators discovered Warner's exemplary record and began questioning why their client was so desperate to destroy a decorated war veteran. The legal pressure intensified when Detective Walker, armed with Carmela's testimony and the evidence Warner had provided, finally arrested Eugene on charges of child abuse and filing false police reports. The arrest took place at Eugene's office during a crucial meeting with potential investors, ensuring maximum public humiliation. Eugene's high-priced attorneys managed to secure his release on bail, but the damage to his reputation was irreversible. Local news outlets picked up the story, and Eugene found himself portrayed as a wealthy contractor who used his position to abuse a defenseless child while the boy's father served his country overseas. Shannon's response to the mounting pressure revealed the person she had truly become. Instead of expressing remorse for her failure to protect Thad, she blamed Warner for destroying her marriage and stability. She accused him of orchestrating a vindictive campaign designed to punish her for choosing happiness over a life of military uncertainty. The confrontation came during a supervised visitation hearing where Shannon was seeking to restore her custodial rights. She arrived at the courthouse with Eugene's legal team, her appearance immaculate, but her eyes hollow with stress and resentment. "This is all his fault," Shannon told the judge, pointing at Warner with barely controlled fury. "He can't accept that I found someone better, someone who could provide the stability he never could. He's using our son as a weapon to destroy my life." Judge Best studied Shannon with the same clinical detachment she might show a particularly unpleasant piece of evidence. "Mrs. Swanson, are you seriously suggesting that your ex-husband somehow forced your current husband to break your son's arm and burn him with a space heater?" Shannon's composure cracked visibly. Thad is confused about what happened. Children sometimes imagine things, especially when they're angry about their parents' divorce. "The medical evidence is quite clear about what happened to your son," Judge Best replied coldly. "What's less clear is why you continue to support the man who caused those injuries." Warner watched Shannon's performance with growing understanding of how completely she had surrendered her maternal instincts to preserve her social status. She had chosen her abusive husband over her injured child, and now she was trying to gaslight everyone involved to maintain that choice. The judge denied Shannon's petition and extended Warner's full custody indefinitely. As they left the courthouse, Eugene cornered Warner in the parking garage, his face flushed with rage and desperation. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Eugene snarled. "Playing your little spy games, turning everyone against me. But you have no idea who you're dealing with. I've destroyed better men than you." Warner's expression remained calm, almost sympathetic. "Eugene, you're not a destroyer. You're a predator who got used to hunting defenseless prey. The problem is, I'm not defenseless, and I'm definitely not prey. Is that a threat?" Eugene stepped closer, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate Warner. "It's a promise," Warner replied quietly. "You hurt my son, and you convinced my ex-wife to help you cover it up. Now you're both going to discover what real destruction looks like." Eugene pulled out his cell phone and began recording. "I'm documenting this conversation. You just threatened me, soldier boy. My lawyers are going to have a field day with this." Warner smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks. "Eugene, you can record whatever you want. In fact, I encourage it. When this is all over, I want there to be a clear record of how many chances I gave you to walk away." That evening, Warner reviewed his progress with the satisfaction of a general whose opening gambit had exceeded expectations. Eugene's business was in ruins, his social network had abandoned him, and the legal system was slowly but inexorably closing in on both him and Shannon. But Warner's campaign was just beginning. The strikes so far had been designed to soften the target, to strip away Eugene's resources and support structure. The real punishment was yet to come, and it would be calibrated to match the precise level of suffering that Thad had endured. Eugene had wanted a war. Now he was going to get one. Chapter 6: Psychological Warfare. Warner understood that Eugene's greatest weakness was his ego. A man who defined himself through dominance and control could be destroyed by systematically stripping away his sense of power. Warner began implementing a campaign of psychological pressure designed to drive Eugene toward increasingly desperate and self-destructive actions. The first element involved manipulating Eugene's environment to create constant, low-level stress. Warner used his surveillance network to monitor Eugene's daily routines, then introduced subtle disruptions that appeared random but accumulated into a pattern of persistent frustration. Eugene's morning coffee order was mysteriously unavailable at his usual cafe. His regular parking space was consistently occupied by different vehicles. His preferred restaurants claimed to have lost his reservations. His golf course suddenly required additional paperwork for his membership renewal. Each incident was minor in isolation, but collectively they created an atmosphere of unpredictability that began to erode Eugene's confidence. Warner escalated the psychological pressure by targeting Eugene's need for social validation. Using anonymous channels, he began spreading carefully crafted rumors about Eugene's business practices and personal behavior throughout the contractor community. The stories were always plausible, often based on actual incidents, and designed to make Eugene appear unstable and untrustworthy. The gossip network in Eugene's social circle proved remarkably efficient. Stories about his explosive temper, his treatment of employees, and his financial difficulties spread through country clubs, business associations, and neighborhood gatherings with viral efficiency. Eugene found himself excluded from poker games, uninvited to networking events, and treated with subtle hostility by people who had previously courted his favor. Shannon became collateral damage in Warner's psychological campaign. As Eugene's stress levels increased, his mask of charm slipped more frequently at home. He began treating Shannon with the same controlling behavior he had shown toward Thad, criticizing her appearance, questioning her activities, and demanding explanations for innocent interactions with other people. The isolation wore on Shannon's mental health. Her nursing supervisors noted a significant decline in her performance and attitude. She began making errors in patient care, missing shifts without proper notice, and displaying irritability that concerned her colleagues. When questioned about her behavior, Shannon blamed stress from the custody battle and Warner's vindictive campaign against her family. Warner monitored Shannon's deterioration with clinical detachment. He felt no satisfaction in her suffering, but he recognized it as a necessary component of making her face the consequences of her choices. She had prioritized her comfort over her son's safety, and now she was experiencing the instability she had tried so desperately to avoid. The breakthrough came when Eugene's paranoia reached a tipping point. Convinced that Warner was orchestrating a sophisticated surveillance operation against him, Eugene hired a private security firm to sweep his house and office for listening devices. The search revealed the bugs Warner had planted during his covert entry, confirming Eugene's suspicions, but also providing evidence of his growing instability. Eugene's response was exactly what Warner had anticipated. Instead of using the discovery strategically, Eugene confronted Warner directly during a school function where Thad was receiving an award for academic achievement despite his recent trauma. "I know what you're doing, you psychotic bastard," Eugene hissed, cornering Warner near the auditorium exit. "The bugs, the rumors, the business sabotage. You think you're some kind of ninja assassin, but you're just a pathetic man who can't accept that his family moved on." Warner maintained his calm demeanor while ensuring their conversation was visible to other parents and school staff. "Eugene, I'm here to support my son's academic achievement. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't play games with me." Eugene's voice rose sharply, drawing stares from nearby families. "I have evidence of your surveillance equipment. I'm going to have you arrested for invasion of privacy, harassment, and stalking." Thad appeared at Warner's side, his young face showing concern about the confrontation. "Dad, is everything okay?" Warner placed a protective hand on his son's shoulder. "Everything's fine, soldier. Mr. Swanson is just upset about some business problems he's been having." Eugene's face contorted with rage of being dismissed so casually. "You arrogant piece of—" He caught himself before completing the profanity, aware that dozens of people were now watching the exchange. "Eugene," Warner said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of command, "you're making a scene at my son's school event. I suggest you leave before you embarrass yourself further." The public nature of Eugene's outburst accomplished exactly what Warner had hoped. Videos of the confrontation appeared on social media within hours, showing Eugene appearing unhinged and aggressive, while Warner remained calm and protective of his son. The incident became another data point in the growing narrative of Eugene's instability. Eugene's legal team advised him to avoid further contact with Warner, recognizing that their client was being systematically provoked into self-destructive behavior. But Eugene's ego wouldn't allow him to appear weak or defeated. He began planning his own counterattack, unaware that every move he made was being monitored and anticipated. The psychological campaign reached its crescendo when Eugene received a package at his office containing photographs of his childhood home in Ohio. The images showed the modest house where he'd grown up, his elderly mother working in her garden, his brother's family at a local restaurant. The message was clear without being explicit. Warner had the capability to reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. Eugene's response was swift and predictable. He hired bodyguards, installed extensive security systems, and began making increasingly frantic demands that police provide protection from Warner's terrorist activities. Each escalation made him appear more paranoid and unstable to the authorities and his remaining social contacts. Shannon watched her husband's deterioration with growing alarm. The charming, confident man she had married was being replaced by someone she barely recognized, suspicious, angry, and increasingly controlling. She began to question the wisdom of her choices, but pride and fear of admitting her mistakes kept her trapped in a marriage that was becoming a prison. Warner observed the psychological disintegration of his targets with the detached professionalism of a surgeon removing a malignant tumor. Eugene and Shannon were destroying themselves through their own moral weakness and poor judgment. Warner was simply accelerating a process that had begun the moment they chose to hurt his son. The endgame was approaching, and Warner was prepared to deliver the final blow that would complete their destruction. Chapter 7. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. Eugene's paranoia had reached pathological levels, but his assessment of the threat wasn't entirely wrong. Warner was indeed orchestrating a comprehensive campaign against him, but the scope and sophistication exceeded even Eugene's fevered imagination. What Eugene perceived as harassment was actually the careful preparation for a final, devastating strike that would eliminate him as a threat permanently. Warner's intelligence network had uncovered Eugene's most closely guarded secret, a pattern of child abuse spanning over a decade, carefully concealed through legal manipulation and victim intimidation. Eugene's first wife, Dion Humphrey, had fled their marriage after he began showing inappropriate interest in her teenage daughter from a previous relationship. The girl, now in her 20s, had never reported the abuse due to threats and manipulation, but she was willing to testify if guaranteed protection. More disturbing were Warner's discoveries about Eugene's business trips and charity work. Under the guise of supporting youth sports programs, Eugene had gained access to vulnerable children from low-income families. 3 families had quietly moved away from San Diego after their children displayed behavioral changes following interaction with Eugene's programs, but none had reported the incidents due to fear of retaliation or disbelief. Warner compiled the evidence with methodical precision, building a case that would not only destroy Eugene, but ensure he faced justice for crimes far beyond what he had done to Thad. The challenge was presenting the information in a way that would trigger proper investigation without revealing Warner's role in gathering the intelligence. The solution came through Warner's relationship with Detective Walker, who had become increasingly frustrated with the limitations placed on his investigation by Eugene's legal team and political connections. Walker was a good cop who genuinely wanted to protect children, but he lacked the resources and authority to pursue Eugene's broader pattern of abuse. Warner arranged for the evidence to reach Walker through a series of anonymous tips that appeared to come from different sources. A concerned teacher reported suspicious interactions between Eugene and students. A former employee discovered compromising photographs while cleaning out old files. A social worker noticed patterns in case reports that had previously seemed unrelated. Each piece of evidence was carefully authenticated and documented to meet legal standards for admissibility. Warner's military training in intelligence analysis allowed him to present the information in a way that built an irrefutable case while protecting his sources and methods. Eugene's world began collapsing with accelerating speed. The FBI raided his offices and home, seizing computers, financial records, and personal items. His business partners formally dissolved their relationships, unwilling to be associated with the growing scandal. His legal team, recognizing the severity of the charges likely to be filed, began negotiating plea deals to minimize their own exposure. Shannon found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. The comfortable life she had chosen over her son's welfare was evaporating, leaving her isolated and facing potential charges as an accessory to child abuse. Her nursing license was suspended pending investigation, and her few remaining friends began avoiding her as the scope of Eugene's crimes became public knowledge. The breaking point came when Thad's therapist, Dr. Aline Barrett, confirmed that the boy was ready to provide detailed testimony about his abuse. Thad had been receiving counseling to help him process his trauma, and Dr. Barrett believed that speaking publicly about his experience would be therapeutic as well as legally valuable. Warner prepared his son carefully for the ordeal ahead, explaining the importance of truth-telling while reassuring him that he would be protected from retaliation. Thad displayed remarkable courage for a 10-year-old, understanding that his testimony might help other children who had suffered similar abuse. "Dad, will telling the truth make Eugene go away forever?" Thad asked during one of their preparation sessions. "Yes, son. Eugene will never be able to hurt you or any other child again." "What about Mom? Will she go away too?" Warner struggled with how to answer honestly without damaging Thad's relationship with Shannon unnecessarily. "Your mother made some very bad choices, Thad. She'll have to face the consequences, but I hope she'll eventually understand that protecting children is more important than protecting herself." Eugene's final act of desperation revealed the true depths of his moral corruption. Facing inevitable prosecution and imprisonment, he attempted to flee the country with Shannon, planning to disappear to a non-extradition jurisdiction where his remaining assets were hidden in offshore accounts. Warner's surveillance network detected the escape plan before it could be executed. Eugene had purchased false documents for himself and Shannon, booked flights to Dubai under assumed names, and arranged for a private yacht to take them to international waters. The plan showed sophisticated criminal connections that added new dimensions to the investigation. The attempted flight occurred on a rainy Tuesday morning at a private airfield outside San Diego. Eugene and Shannon arrived in separate vehicles, apparently unaware that federal agents were monitoring their movements. Warner positioned himself where he could observe the arrest without interfering with law enforcement operations. Shannon's demeanor during the arrest revealed the complete collapse of her self-deception. She screamed at Eugene, accusing him of destroying her life and lying about his ability to protect her from consequences. She blamed Warner for orchestrating their downfall, claimed she had been manipulated and deceived throughout their relationship, and begged the agents to understand that she was a victim rather than an accomplice. Eugene's response was characteristic of his narcissistic personality. He threatened the arresting agents with lawsuits, claimed diplomatic immunity through fictional business connections, and attempted to bribe his way out of custody. His desperation was palpable, the mask of civilized behavior finally stripped away to reveal the predator beneath. Warner watched the arrests with grim satisfaction. The legal system was finally functioning as it should, protecting innocent children from predators who exploited their positions of trust and authority. But he knew that justice through official channels was only part of the reckoning Eugene would face. In the custody of federal marshals, Eugene would be placed in a prison population that included many fathers and family men who had little tolerance for child abusers. Word of Eugene's crimes would spread quickly through the inmate network, and his wealthy, entitled background would make him a particularly tempting target for prison justice. Shannon would face charges as an accessory to child abuse and conspiracy to evade prosecution, but her role as a manipulated spouse might earn her a reduced sentence. More importantly, she would have to live with the knowledge that she had chosen financial security over her son's safety, a decision that would define the rest of her life. The legal proceedings would take months to complete, but Warner was confident that both Eugene and Shannon would face appropriate consequences for their crimes. His mission was approaching completion, but one final phase remained, ensuring that Thad could heal from his trauma and build a future free from the shadows of their betrayal. Chapter 8: Retribution. The trial of Eugene Swanson became a media sensation, drawing national attention to the intersection of wealth, privilege, and child abuse. Warner observed the proceedings with the detached interest of a professional who had successfully completed a complex mission, but his primary focus remained on helping Thad navigate the difficult process of testifying against his former stepfather. Thad's testimony was delivered with remarkable composure for a 10-year-old. Dr. Barrett had prepared him well, and Warner's presence in the courtroom provided the security he needed to speak truthfully about his experiences. The boy's account of systematic psychological abuse culminating in physical violence moved even seasoned court reporters to tears. "Eugene told me my real dad didn't love me because he was always gone," Thad testified, his voice clear and steady. "He said if I was a good son, I would call him father instead. When I said no, he got really angry and grabbed my arm. I heard it crack before I felt the pain." Eugene's defense team attempted to portray Thad as a confused child influenced by his father's desire for revenge, but the medical evidence and supporting witness testimony made their task impossible. Carmela Escobar's detailed account of what she had witnessed eliminated any doubt about Eugene's guilt. Shannon's separate trial proceeded simultaneously, and her transformation from the confident woman Warner had married to the broken defendant facing prison was complete. Her defense attorney argued that she had been psychologically manipulated by Eugene, that her failure to protect Thad resulted from fear rather than malice. Warner felt no satisfaction watching Shannon's legal destruction. She had once been the woman he loved, the mother of his child, and her fall from grace represented a personal failure as much as a legal victory. But Thad's safety required that Shannon face consequences for her choices, regardless of Warner's complicated feelings about their shared past. The evidence of Eugene's broader pattern of abuse emerged during the trial, revealing a predator who had operated with impunity for over a decade. Multiple victims came forward, supported by advocates and protected by court orders, to describe their experiences with Eugene's systematic grooming and abuse. Dr. Mae Weeks, a forensic psychologist who had evaluated Eugene, testified about his antisocial personality disorder and the likelihood of recidivism if he were ever released. Her professional opinion was that Eugene represented a permanent threat to children and would continue offending regardless of treatment or consequences. Eugene's conviction on all charges was inevitable, but the sentencing phase revealed the true extent of his crimes. Judge Catherine Olson, known for her tough stance on child abuse cases, delivered a sentence that exceeded even the prosecution's recommendations. "Mr. Swanson, you have betrayed the trust of children, families, and communities throughout this region," Judge Olson stated, her voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. "Your crimes are particularly heinous because you used your position of wealth and respectability to gain access to vulnerable victims. The court sentences you to 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole." Eugene's reaction to the sentence revealed his true character one final time. He screamed threats at the judge, blamed Warner for orchestrating his downfall, and promised revenge against everyone involved in his prosecution. His outburst reinforced the wisdom of the court's decision and provided closure for his victims. Shannon received a sentence of 5 years with possibility of parole after 3, reflecting her role as an accessory rather than a primary perpetrator. Her final statement to the court showed the first genuine remorse she had expressed throughout the entire ordeal. "I failed my son when he needed me most," Shannon said, tears streaming down her face. "I chose comfort over courage, and I will regret that decision for the rest of my life. I hope someday Thad can forgive me, but I understand if he never can." Warner felt a moment of recognition watching Shannon's breakdown. This was the woman he had married, the person capable of genuine emotion and moral clarity. But years of self-deception and compromise had buried that woman beneath layers of rationalization and willful blindness. The media coverage of the trials brought unexpected consequences for Warner and Thad. Veterans organizations hailed Warner as a hero who had protected his child and exposed a dangerous predator. Child advocacy groups used their story to highlight the importance of believing children's reports of abuse. Publisher inquiries arrived suggesting that Warner write a book about his experience. Warner deflected most of the attention, recognizing that public notoriety could compromise his future military career and Thad's recovery. But he did agree to speak at a few veterans events, emphasizing the importance of family loyalty and the obligation to protect vulnerable people from predators. The personal cost of Warner's campaign became clear as the legal proceedings concluded. His military career would likely be affected by the publicity and the methods he had used to gather evidence. His relationship with Shannon was permanently destroyed, eliminating any possibility of co-parenting cooperation. Most significantly, Thad would grow up knowing that his mother had chosen her abuser over her child's safety. But Warner accepted these costs as necessary prices for ensuring Thad's protection and securing justice for Eugene's victims. Some wars could only be won through total commitment, regardless of personal consequences. The final act of Warner's campaign occurred not in a courtroom, but in the federal prison where Eugene was serving his sentence. Within 6 months of his incarceration, Eugene was found dead in his cell, the victim of what prison officials classified as a suicide but inmates understood as justice delivered by fellow prisoners who despised child abusers. Warner received the news of Eugene's death with the same emotional detachment he had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. He felt no celebration or regret, only the satisfaction of completing a mission that had required every skill he had developed during 20 years of military service. Eugene Swanson was gone, his victims were safe, and Thad could begin rebuilding his life without fear of retaliation or continued abuse. The war was over, and Warner had achieved total victory. Chapter 9: New Beginnings. 2 years after Eugene's death and Shannon's imprisonment, Warner stood in the kitchen of his new house, preparing breakfast while Thad completed homework at the dining room table. The domestic routine represented a normalcy that had seemed impossible during the darkest days of their ordeal, but father and son had built a life together that honored both their shared trauma and their determination to move forward. Thad was thriving academically and socially, his natural resilience strengthened by therapy and his father's unwavering support. The boy had grown 3 inches and developed the confident bearing of someone who had survived genuine adversity and emerged stronger. His relationship with Dr. Barrett continued, but the sessions had evolved from trauma processing to normal adolescent development issues. "Dad, my teacher wants to meet with you about the gifted program," Thad announced over his cereal. "She thinks I should skip 7th grade and go straight to 8th. Warner felt a surge of pride mixed with concern about his son's accelerated development. "What do you think about that, soldier? Are you ready for that kind of challenge?" Thad considered the question with the thoughtfulness that had become characteristic of his personality. "I think I can handle the academics, but I don't want to be the youngest kid in high school. Maybe we could try some advanced classes without skipping the whole grade." Warner nodded approvingly. Thad's ability to analyze situations objectively and express his concerns maturely reflected the wisdom he had gained through his experiences. The boy understood that being exceptional came with both opportunities and responsibilities. Warner's own life had taken unexpected directions since completing his campaign against Eugene and Shannon. His military career had indeed been affected by the publicity surrounding the trials, but not in the ways he had anticipated. Instead of punishment or early retirement, he had been recruited into a specialized unit that investigated child abuse within military families. The assignment allowed Warner to use his unique combination of investigative skills and personal experience to protect other children from predators who exploited their positions of authority. His success rate in exposing abuse and securing convictions had earned recognition throughout the military justice system. Shannon's release from prison was scheduled for the following year, assuming good behavior and successful completion of rehabilitation programs. Thad had received letters from his mother expressing remorse and requesting permission to rebuild their relationship, but the boy remained ambivalent about contact with the woman who had failed to protect him when protection was needed most. "Do you think I should see Mom when she gets out?" Thad asked during one of their regular conversations about difficult topics. Warner had dreaded this question while simultaneously preparing for it. "That's your decision to make, son. Your mother made terrible choices, but she's still your mother. If you decide you want to see her, I'll support that. If you decide you're not ready, I'll support that too. I'm not angry at her anymore," Thad said thoughtfully. "But I don't trust her judgment about people. What if she finds another Eugene?" The question revealed Thad's sophisticated understanding of human nature and relationship dynamics. Warner recognized that his son had developed protective instincts that would serve him well throughout life, but he worried about the cynicism that might result from such early exposure to adult betrayal. "Trust is something that has to be earned back slowly," Warner explained. "If your mother is serious about making amends, She'll understand that you need time and proof that she's changed. Real change takes years, not months. Warner's relationship with the extended family had evolved as well. His parents, initially confused by the complexity of the custody situation, had become fierce advocates for Thad's welfare once they understood the full scope of what had occurred. Shannon's parents, devastated by their daughter's choices and imprisonment, maintained contact with Thad through carefully supervised visits that Warner monitored for any attempt to manipulate the boy's emotions. The house Warner had purchased was located in a neighborhood with excellent schools and proximity to military facilities, but more importantly, it provided Thad with stability and security after years of upheaval. The boy had his own room, decorated with academic awards and sports trophies that reflected his growing confidence and achievement. Warner had also begun dating, cautiously and with Thad's knowledge and approval. Detective Mario Walker's sister, Lillian Walker, was a high school counselor who understood both the challenges of single parenthood and the complexities of Thad's background. Their relationship was progressing slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than passion or convenience. "I like Miss Lillian," Thad had told Warner after meeting her several times. "She treats me like a person, not like a victim or a prize to be won." The comment revealed Thad's ability to recognize authentic relationships versus manipulative ones, a skill that would protect him from future predators but might also make it difficult for him to trust people completely. Warner accepted this as a reasonable trade-off given their experiences. On weekends, Warner and Thad often visited the military cemetery where Warner's grandfather was buried. The older man had been a World War II veteran who taught Warner about duty, loyalty, and the importance of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Standing beside the grave, Warner reflected on how those lessons had guided his campaign against Eugene and Shannon. "Grandpa would have been proud of how you handled everything," Thad said during one of these visits. "You didn't let them get away with hurting me." Warner placed his hand on his son's shoulder, feeling the solid strength of the boy who had survived abuse and emerged with his moral compass intact. "He would have been proud of you too, soldier. You told the truth when it mattered, even though it was scary and difficult." The legal system had functioned as intended, delivering justice to Eugene's victims and holding Shannon accountable for her complicity. But Warner understood that true justice had been achieved through his systematic destruction of Eugene's life and reputation, ensuring that the predator could never again exploit his position to harm children. Eugene's death in prison had provided final closure, eliminating any possibility of future revenge or manipulation. Warner felt no guilt about the methods he had used or the outcome he had orchestrated. Some enemies could only be defeated through total war, and Eugene had declared war the moment he chose to abuse Thad. Shannon's eventual release would present new challenges, but Warner was confident in his ability to protect Thad from any attempt at emotional manipulation or reconciliation that wasn't in the boy's best interests. His son's welfare remained the highest priority, superseding any other consideration, including family harmony or social expectations. As Warner looked toward the future, he saw a young man who would carry forward the lessons of loyalty, integrity, and protective strength that had defined their family for generations. Thad would face normal adolescent challenges, pursue his education and interests, and eventually build his own family based on the values he had learned through both positive example and negative contrast. The war was over. The mission was complete. Father and son could now focus on building a life worthy of the sacrifices made to achieve their freedom and security. Warner Grimes had collected his debt in blood, and the account was permanently settled.